For the occasional woodworking that I do in my garage, the shop vac works pretty well at cleaning up and collecting dust. Except dealing with the filter is always a pain. It's messy, it clogs up quickly, you lose suction, and it's just not a fun experience cleaning the thing out. So I figured it was about time I tried a Cyclone dust separator for my shop vac. Now, rather than build the sort of vertical stacked setup or put everything on a big flat cart that took up a lot of floor space, I wanted to build something sort of modular and minimal that I could attach to the vacuum when I needed it and be able to take it off if I didn't. But first, I had to build some way to attach something to my vacuum. I started off by making a couple of blocks cut to the same height as the casters that I'd picked out. I set them up next to the casters on the shop vac and marked out a couple of mounting holes, drilled through the board and into the wheel housing, and then mounted those pieces to the wheels by running in screws from the backside. This would give me a platform at the right height to match up with my casters. Once these pieces were set in place, I cut off the bottom inch or so to give myself a little bit of clearance above the floor. Now with those two pieces on the wheels of the shop vac, I cut a small platform piece to go across them and screwed that down into place. And now I had a nice flat surface to attach things to on the back of my shop vac. To collect the dust, we'll just use this standard 5-gallon bucket and just got to measure it up to find the right size for our platform. Rated the scrap wood for some plywood, cut it to size. Just had to trim off these corners to make it fit properly on the back of the shop vac. And then added this spacer plate here for the casters to make everything level height with the shop vac. Set that on the back of the shop vac, and for now we'll screw it down into place, but we'll make that removable later. Now it's time to add the Cyclone to our setup. This one was sent to me by the folks at banggood.com. I'll include some links in the description for anyone who's interested. I wanted to try this model in particular because it was one of the cheapest ones I'd seen available on the market. So I started off by marking out the mounting holes onto the lid of the 5-gallon bucket, get them started a little bit with the awl, and then measured up the opening on the bottom of the Cyclone so I could mark out a slightly larger circle to cut out on our lid. So I drilled these out for 1/4 20 bolts. And since this was just pretty soft plastic, I ended up using the utility knife to cut out the center hole. Drilled out the holes on the Cyclone to fit the 1/4 20 bolts. Sealed up the entire thing with a little silicone caulk. Put the Cyclone down onto the lid. And tightened everything up with the socket wrench. Had a little bit of squeeze out to clean out on the bottom of the lid, and just set that aside to cure for a while. Now with the Cyclone added, this whole setup is getting a little bit tall, and I want to sort of contain everything and give myself a nice, say, waist height handle to move things around. So I added a couple uprights from my scrap bin, screwed them on with some triangular gusset plates to keep everything sturdy. And then I added this center plate, which serves a few different purposes. First, it stabilizes the uprights. Second, it holds the bucket down. And third, it presses against the handle of the shop vac, so as I'm moving it around, it pushes the shop vac around. Finally, we add a handle on the top here. That moves around pretty nicely. Now to connect the Cyclone to the vacuum, I picked up this new hose and hooked it up to the vacuum and ended up cutting it to the right length to get to the Cyclone. But one of the problems I ran into with this Cyclone is that I couldn't get any of my regular hose connectors to fit on it. I don't know if they weren't standard sizes or if I just didn't try hard enough, but I couldn't hook it up as is, so I figured I would turn to 3D printing to make some connectors of my own. Granted, this doesn't make this the most practical project for everyone, but I was on a mission to make this thing work, so I'm going to use the tools that I have available to me. So I headed into Fusion 360 and started modeling a right angle connector for the top of the Cyclone. Started off by extruding a simple circle shape for the bottom piece that would attach to the Cyclone. Then from the side view, I sketched a line that I could extrude along or sweep to take that circle profile of the fitting and bend it around the corner to make that right angle connector. Then I drew the circle to extrude and swept it along that path. I then came in and filled in some of the gaps between the two shapes, then chamfered and filleted over some of the sharp edges, and then added a couple ridges on the hose connector end to hopefully hold the hose on there a little bit better. Sent that off to the 3D printer, and many hours later, I had a custom design fitting for the top of the Cyclone. For the Cyclone's intake port, I recreated the intake from my vacuum so I could have a shape that would match up with my existing hose with that little lip on the front so it could clip on. And just like the fitting on the top of the Cyclone, I glued that on with lots of silicone caulking to fill in the gaps. So at this point, I had made it out to the hardware store to get the machine screws and wing nuts that I'd needed. So let's make this thing removable. And I started off with picking one drill bit that was a little undersized on this machine screw, smaller than the threads. Drilled that out of the base. And then ran in 2 machine screws, and those are nice and snug in the smaller hole. Then picked an oversized drill bit for the bolts to pass through, and drilled out my screw holes in the platform. Slip that into place and held everything down with a couple washers and wing nuts. Now it's finally time to give this thing a test. That's everything I had in my shop vac at the time. Basically empty in the bucket, a little bit of dust, but nothing much. Hooked everything back up. Strapped it in, and did a little rebranding while I was at it. Incidentally, heat guns work great for removing stubborn labels and stickers. And fired it up. You can see we're still nice and clean inside the vacuum. Filter's not clogged up. Looking good there. Let's check the bucket. There is everything I vacuumed up off the floor, collected nicely into the bucket for easy cleanup. Couldn't have worked out much better. As always, thanks for watching. Now it's time for me to get back to work.